Welcome to Heroes Epic Videos. Today I'm working on my Hilux 3RZ. Looks like it's done a head gasket. So I'm going through, I'm changing all the cooling system, cleaning the thermostat, any gaskets, leads, spark plugs, generally everything that's got to do with cooling. I'll do the clutch fan oil, and hopefully that fixes the issue, which it's overheating, it's idling rough, it's blowing white smoke, and yeah, let's dive in. Now you're probably wondering, why am I just replacing the head gasket? Well, I've got another motor up the back, and I plan to actually build a turbo engine, and I'll put a lot of I'll put the pistons in, I'll put rods in, I'll do head studs. I'll probably do cams as well. I'm not actually sure yet, but we're going to do like a low boost engine, but it's going to be reliable. So this is just, I didn't intend to do this. I wanted another 30,000 Ks out of this car before I started doing that budget wise. But we're going to actually build that engine quite soon. Probably should also let everyone know that I've never done this before. So it's a first for me. So obviously the comment section is probably going to go off with experts of every description telling me what I'm doing wrong, what I'm doing right. But an expert is someone who's made all the mistakes. So hopefully I'll make a few mistakes along the way and fix them up as we go and learn something.
Do yourself a favour, if you don't have a decent toolkit and you want one, and something that's portable and it's got 95% of stuff you can do on the side of the road, get one of these 198 piece toolkits from Super Cheap Auto. They do come on special, and they're really good. They've got the 12-point sockets, they've got 6-point sockets, they've got 3 different size ratchets, breaker bar, and obviously these bad boys for your wheel nuts. I've already used this one a fair bit. So yeah, it's a really good kit, and it's all weather sealed. Tool Pro. Had to pick one of these up as well. I didn't have one. It's probably one of the only tools I don't have. So at this stage, I've just taken all the head off, taken the radiator out, taken the bull bar off, because that was a pain in the ass. I've ordered a new exhaust, new headers. Spark plugs are on their way. I'm going to need a new temp sensor because the other one broke. It was just filled with RTV and shoved in the top of the inlet for the head. The plug on this oil pressure sensor has broken, so it's snapped, it's perished, so I'll have to go down to Toyota and get a new one of those. What else? Everything else isn't too bad. I didn't break any studs off getting the headers off the old exhaust off, and I thought that was going to happen. There is a bracket down, like a U-clamp bracket that's down on the front section of the exhaust. Now I had to cut that because they've welded the nut at the top of the clamp on both sides, so I just hit it with a recip saw, and now it's loose. But we're going to replace the whole exhaust system anyway. Other things I'm doing while I'm here. So I've already got the water pump off. I'm going to put a new gasket on the back of the thermostat housing. That alternator is pretty much new, so I don't need to do that. And I'm also going to replace a couple of these heater hoses that are getting a bit, this one's all right, but there's other heater hoses that are getting a bit hard. So I'm pretty keen to get stuck into those while I'm here. No real other upgrades. Classic Toyota. Power steering pump leaks, but it's always leaked. So, no, hang on, the pump's over here. That was leaking. The actual power steering system itself leaks as well, but it's not bad enough to warrant getting rid of that. One of the concerning issues is I've just rust proofed or rust converted all this. because the sides of the condenser are actually started to rust. But the actual radiator itself is actually in pretty good nick, so I'm going to give those just a coat of black zinc, and I'm going to tidy up all the bull bar mounts and repaint that with some underbody black so it stops corroding. Just tidy some stuff up. If you're wondering where I'm getting a lot of the gaskets and seals, I had to get a rocket cover gasket, and it was going to be about $200 just for the rocket cover. So I jumped on AliExpress and I got a whole seal kit for about $100, and it comes pretty much with everything apart from the thermostat housing gasket, which I had to buy from Toyota. So look, if they're going to work, they work. If they don't, lesson learnt, but we'll see. So got an inlet gasket, got an exhaust gasket. So yeah, we'll get stuck into it. Where the housing is, the water pump housing is mounted to, there's a bit of pitting and stuff. I've cleaned it up. I've wet and dried the mating surface as best as possible. It's obviously been a while since this water pump has been replaced. The gasket did not come off in one piece. It separated as I pulled it off. So we'll go ahead and put the new one back on. Okay, water pumping. We're going to need a gasket for that housing. So I'm going to duck down the road and see if I can get one of those, one of these, and see how we go. So the headers arrived. They were $320 off eBay. They're Wildcat headers, so hopefully they fit. We got some spark plugs from Online Auto Parts. We got a couple of connectors that I needed for the temp sensor and the knock sensor. They were broken. They were from EFI Solutions. And I got a gasket from Toyota and a bit of this stuff because I don't know how long this head gasket's going to last. The head gasket I've coated in copper spray. It's a cheap gasket. I just got a kit off AliExpress. So we'll give it a crack. Don't know if it'll work, but gave it a spray of copper spray. That'll help take up any small defects that are in the block. Hopefully give us a better seal, because I'm not machining anything. I'm just putting it back together, and we'll see how that goes. Righto, so here's the list. Gonna finish off prepping the engine block. Have a look at the head. It looks pretty straight. I ran a straight edge on it. I'll finish cleaning it up. It's coated in oil at the moment. I use some foam spray and stuff to get all the old oil out. I do have some new ones of these from some new injectors I bought for the next engine I'm building. And just, yeah, keep tidying up as we go. But the biggest thing to do is just prep this block to make sure that this head gasket's going to work. And if it doesn't, it doesn't, because I've got a spare engine that we're going to build later on. So this is the top of the head. I'm going to scrape all this back, clean it all up, and then give it a sand down, pick the stone, get it cleaned up so we've got a nice clean surface for the gasket to seal. Okay, so yesterday we replaced these two hoses. They're for the oil cooler. And I replaced this one back here. So I went to Maxi Parts, and got those. I've replaced the housing gasket in here, and we have a new thermostat, which I'll probably remove that thermostat to do a flush of the cooling system once I've got the engine back together. I've cleaned both of the surfaces, so I wet and dried the surface of this metal flange here and the housing to remove any debris and just old gunk that's built up over time. I've put that cooling hose back in just temporarily, and then once we've got the block back on, the head back on and torque down, etc., we can look to do a bit more. There's another thermostat, coolant hose that's got to go from here up to the throttle body, and there's a sensor in there, so that needs to go back in. I can't bypass that apparently, so I was going to bypass it, generally because it's something you need in much cooler climates. I've replaced a couple of these plugs, so we replaced I replaced a couple of plugs that were broken, just deteriorated from the heat. Where is it? We got a temp coolant sensor plug that is right here. That's a new plug. So yeah, just had to get them from EFI Solutions. And there was it's either oil or knock, I'm not sure. It's a single pin plug, and it's different to that one, is this one here. So that had just snapped, and when I pulled it apart they snapped as well. So yeah, we'll keep going. We'll go on to the cleaning up the head for the gasket and go from there.
So if you're anything like me, you're probably pretty good at pulling things apart and terrible at putting things back together. But I was fairly lucky that I had a Haynes manual to take me through the process of all the maintenance steps and removal of the cams, the belt, the fan, all the bits and pieces. So the Haynes manual, which I bought on Marketplace pretty cheap, has been absolutely invaluable to this whole process. Off camera you can't see it, but I've bagged and tagged all the nuts and bolts, so I knew where everything was going back to. You've always wanted to give this sort of thing a crack and probably never had the confidence, but between obviously all the YouTube channels that are out there with heaps of information on these on these engines, I should say, you never really stumped at what to do next. I did have some trouble getting the front bolt off the intake cam off, and look, I looked up YouTube, I found a video straight away, I followed the process and I managed to get the front bolt off the timing gear, no worries. So but other than that, like, I've been, I've got, I'm exactly that guy, I've got all the gear and no idea. So at some stage you got to put all these bits and pieces to good use and have a crack, and it's been a lot of fun. I'm lucky I haven't sheared any bolts or didn't over torque anything and ruin the alloy head or anything like that. I was fairly careful in that regard, and it's been a great process. It's been a great learning opportunity because it was a cheap Hilux, it is a cheap Hilux, and I've always wanted to give something like this a go. And when the opportunity came up to give this repair a go, I jumped at it. So getting the head ready for the head gasket, I've seen a heap of blokes do this online where they just give it a sand, tidy it up, get as much of the pitting out or blemishes as you can, and refit the head to the block, and do the same obviously for the block. I got 99% of the pitting out, if there was pitting, and I'll put some shots up of the head gasket and where it actually failed, and you guys will be able to see. So I caught it fairly early, and that was pretty lucky. Like, there was no oil in the water, there was no, the oil that came out of the sump was still looked like oil, so I was actually pretty lucky to catch it at this stage. The other part of this whole process is that I've got a couple of mates that are mechanics. They also build engines and do stuff in their spare time, and any queries or questions or thoughts that I had, I ran it past them and they gave me that support. So I'll give them a shout out later on in the video.
I think that's as good as I'm going to get it. So that took about an hour of locking back, maybe a bit less, using a couple of different types of grit, just a stone and then 1,000 grit to finish it off. And after the head, I gave the block another go at sanding back, and it came up heaps better. Here's where you can see where the head gasket's failed and why I needed to replace it. You can see on cylinder 1 that it actually has some carbonation that's cleaned off, and that's a sign of the head gasket failing. Another hot tip is to replace the idler bearing. It's $7 from Repco as opposed to about $90 for the whole unit. One of the best tips from the Haynes manual is to set out your intake and your exhaust cams like this in order, and make sure you mark each one of the valve shims. Okay, so the head's back on the block. Cleaned up all the mating surfaces. So there's a outlet for the back of the head. Comes out into that heater hose, which goes into the dash. So as I've been going through those fittings and replacing the gaskets, I've been cleaning up the surfaces with one of these little bad boys. So you can see the inlet side's all cleaned up now. I've done the same on the exhaust side. So that surface is all clean. Now we are going to put the head bolts in and start torquing it down. Following the Haynes manual, the bolts have to be tightened in order. First you tighten them in order up to spec, and then the second part of the process is to tighten them 90 degrees in order and then 90 degrees in order again. And that is the final setting. I'll show you at the end of this process where the paint marks end up from 180 degrees. So go through, mark them, and then turn each bolt 90 in order, and then turn each bolt 90 in order again. And it's critical that you do this. So here I am putting the first paint mark on the top of the head bolts, and then I'll go through in order and turn them once at 90 degrees, and then I'll go back through again and turn them again at 90 degrees. It's hard to get the breaker bar out for this, and you can visually inspect each bolt to see if it's turned 90 degrees. Here's a quick visual inspection to make sure all the bolts have been turned 180 degrees from where they started. So it looks good. Time to put the cams in. So following the manual, you've got to tighten down the bolts, just hand tight or as close to hand tight, in order. That goes for the intake and for the exhaust. The dots have got to be lined up, which are the timing marks. They're on the back side of the two cogs at the front of the cams. So once you've got them down sort of sitting tight, you've got to go through then and torque them all up to spec. So it's a multi-step process though. So you'd sort of go down a few threads on each bolt in sequence, and it takes about 2 or 3 goes to get it all the way down. It's a reverse procedure of how you take them off, so you don't put unequal load on the cams themselves, and it's a bit time consuming, but obviously it's fairly worthwhile doing. There was an M6 little hex socket head cap screw that I put into the exhaust. Because there's 2 cogs there that are together, so just a little M6 bolt was holding those 2 together. Just reading the book here again, making sure I'm following the procedure correctly. And then the next step, once this is all properly tightened down, is we get to install the bolt on the front of the timing gear. Now this is the bolt that gave me the most amount of grief, because it is by far the hardest bolt to get off this engine. It's the one at the front of the timing gear. Now I've got it back in there just sitting there. and I'm currently getting the breaker bar ready. Oh, sorry, the torque wrench ready just to tighten it back up to spec. Now you can see the little half moon seal at the front of the engine is out, so you need to get that out. Now you need to put down some sacrificial pieces of steel onto the head, and then you need to put a bar through the pulley, the gear itself. Now the reason you've got to do that is because the book says you've got to put a wrench on the cam and then use your other hand to loosen the bolt, and there is no way on God's green earth that bolt is coming out using a shifter and a socket. So I had to get my breaker bar and do this to get the bolt off initially. Now I've got the bar and the sacrificial pieces of steel back in there, so when I tighten this I don't damage the alloy block. So, and there you go, that's it. It was only like 76 newton meters of torque or something on that bolt, but I tell you what, it took about 340 million to get it off. Just going to clean up this little half moon here. You just use RTV. I've got some black RTV. I've used grey RTV. Both don't leak. They're both good for this purpose. So just making sure all the old gasket material's gone before I whack it back in. Cleaned it up with some brake cleaner. And then yeah, I'll glue the little half moon seal back in. Last bit to go on the hole, just got to get this exhaust fit. So there's a hole in this end. This bit of pipe seems pretty good, but that's the old headers. That's part of the old exhaust. There's someone at a hot dog or something going on the end here. And there's a quick fix at one stage I put a new one of those on. Sent to the muffler shop just to make it quieter, because the old one had rusted out through there. It was loud as, sounding like a rally car. Right. I'm going to trim up that end. I'm going to trim this end. I'm going to cut that pipe off. And I'm going to make another flange. If you're watching the other videos on the channel, you'll know that I have never TIG welded before in my life before owning this TIG welder. So this is probably the second time that I've actually, it is the second time I've actually TIG welded. So I don't think it turned out too bad. It's been a couple of weeks and the exhaust hasn't cracked or fallen off yet. The other flange I made out of a bit of 8mm flat bar. Had to put a hole saw through it on the drill press and drilled a couple of 12mm holes in the ends and found some stainless bolts, and yeah, you'll see the result at the end. Turned out pretty good, I reckon. Okay, so the engine's all back together. Radiator's got fluid in it. New headers are on. Old exhaust has been cut out. Oh, let's see how many bolts I forgot. Thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed it, and tune in next time for more epic adventures in the shed.